From Home Literary Festival. My name's Sarah Allely and I'm hosting a discussion between UK authors Georgie and Samantha Harvey. This event has been curated in partnership with Wasafiri magazine to raise money for the UK-based mental health charity Mind. Mind provides advice and support to empower people experiencing mental health problems. Their statistics show that on average 1 in 4 people experience a mental health problem in a typical year, and 2020 is not a typical year. You can make a donation to support Mind using the link to your BookBound, Just Giving page displayed below. You can find out more about BookBound, Wasafiri, Mind, and our authors by visiting our website, which is bookbound2020.co.uk. And now onto our event. Georgie, your first book, We Swim to the Shark, tells the story of how you sort of self-prescribed exposure therapy to rid yourself of a phobia of fish. And we're talking any fish, not just sharks. Samantha Harvey, you've published 4 novels, and your first, The Wilderness, was shortlisted for several major prizes. And this year you published a memoir, The Shapeless Unease, A Year of Not Sleeping. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
So I was wondering, Georgie, first of all, can we just go back in time a little? How did you actually wind up with a phobia of fish?
Yeah, it's a pretty weird one, isn't it? Or I thought it was a weird one. And then when I started writing about it and talking to people, and then the book came out, suddenly lots of people started coming up and kind of whispering, hey, I'm really, really afraid of fish too. It turned out that loads of people are scared of them. So when I was really young, I didn't have problems with fish at all. I thought they were great. My surname is Cod, as you've mentioned. So I also felt a little bit of affinity for my scaly friends. But I got bitten a few times when I was a kid by fish in the water, which was a surprise. And I watched Jaws way too many times, like lots of people. And I got to the point where I just started overthinking fish and what they were thinking about me. And when I actually went to Australia on a snorkeling trip with my mum when I was 15, and I got into the water in the Great Barrier Reef, which is obviously like a trip of a lifetime. And I was surrounded by these fish who all seemed to be just gawping at me, and I interpret it as they wanted to kill me. And so even though they were like this big, and so I kind of ran out of the water, like, that's it, I can't do fish, no, I'm definitely, ugh. And I just got obsessed, and yeah, every time I thought about them, they made me feel gross and freaked out. I couldn't stop looking at them anyway.
And so you live in London, not a place known for its oceans, and so you sort of set off on a bit of an adventure. And this journey was also a bit of a big picture reboot. Can you tell us where it took you?
Yeah, it took me to lots of different places, and so I was fed up of my life in London, and actually my writing career that I was hoping would be going really well, and I would have multiple books published, etc. By that point in my life, after writing and submitting, it hadn't gone anywhere, and I was feeling really stuck. So I decided to become the next Jacques Cousteau in my head, learn how to dive, conquer this fear of fish, and just try swimming with the biggest fish in the world. Because once I could do that, I would definitely have been able to conquer all my fears all together, and everything would be fine, and I'd never be anxious again. The end. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, it didn't go like that. It was quite complicated, and lots happened along the way. So yeah, it went all over the place.
And we'll encourage people to go and read your book and find out what happened. We won't spoil it here for them. And Samantha Harvey, in your memoir, The Shapeless Unease, A Year of Not Sleeping, you share your intimate story of insomnia, grief, resistance and recovery. And there's also a connection with the ocean in the end. But can you just start by telling us, why did you stop sleeping?
That's a question I still can't answer. And although this book is called A Year of Not Sleeping, it's actually been now more like 2.5 years, and it is somewhat better, but I still don't sleep very much. And I still don't know the answer to that question, really. I mean, at the beginning of the book, there's a kind of spoof case study of an insomniac who's evidently me. And I posit lots of possible reasons. You know, there was a bit of road noise outside my house, and that was disturbing my sleep. And I had been feeling quite anxious for a couple of years before that, which wasn't something I'd really had in my life before. It sort of seemed that as soon as I hit 40, I suddenly went into this different kind of anxious mode, you know, on cue. And so that played into it. And then a few things in my personal life went wrong, nothing major, just a few troubles. My cousin died suddenly, and you know, and it was quite a traumatic death, and I wasn't very close to my cousin, but somehow his death and my insomnia dovetailed they happened at about the right time, the same time, I should say. And somehow they got intertwined in my thinking, and I started to associate the two things, and I would lie in bed awake a lot just thinking about my cousin and how we used to play together as kids, and how he was now buried, and I became very overly unhealthily obsessed with thinking about his death, and then thinking about death generally, and so it went on. And the problem is, once you're awake in the night, you know, that's the time when all of your fears and worries, as everyone knows, sort of catch up with you. So it's such a horrible kind of self-fulfilling thing, and you stop knowing what symptom and what's cause. You know, are you not sleeping because you're worried about all these things, or are you simply worrying about those things because you're awake too much and you're thinking too much? And prior to my insomnia starting, I had been a kind of champion sleeper my whole life. I barely had an interrupted night of sleep in my whole kind of, at that time, 42 years or so. So it was such a shock. Sorry, Sarah.
I'm sorry, no, there was just a delay, so I thought you'd stop speaking. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to ask, I mean, don't give away the whole story, obviously, but what did you discover? There's a connection between both your book and Georgie's book about in terms of what you discovered that could help with insomnia. And I'm just wondering if you can tell us about that, and whether you think it's something that we can all learn from.
Well, you know, I don't think that there's very much encouraging news in my book for the insomniac, unless you know, the book is less about insomnia, I suppose, and more a kind of, it ended up being a sort of simulation of what it's like to just be very sleep deprived, in the way everything comes in fragments, and it's sort of quite unsettled and ranging in the voice that I've written the book in. So in that sense, maybe there's something to identify there. If you're an insomniac and you might read it, and I think I would have taken comfort from reading something like this and thinking, oh, it's not just me, you know, this is something other people struggle with. And that's obviously a big part of healing in well, mental health problems, but all sorts of problems. And I sort of, again, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but at the end of the book, I have a section called Cure for Insomnia, and it really isn't a cure for insomnia, but it was a slightly flippant title for it. But it's about swimming, and wild swimming mainly. And you know, I'm not saying wild swimming is a cure for insomnia, and if it were, I would be cured, because I do a lot of it. But for me, that moment of sort of immersion in water and just being in another element is the antithesis of lying awake in the kind of dead, dark night, you know, being underwater, in water, being kind of cold and your body rallying, being so kind of lucidly awake. It has been incredibly helpful to me.
I was, Samantha, when I was reading your book, and there were so many points that chimed for me. I've not had extreme sleep deprivation, but I have had trouble sleeping for as long as I remember. And one thing that struck me, especially just then as well, when you were talking about wild swimming, is that I wondered whether part of the thing about sleep is that sleep involves, it's like an extreme way that you can let go and kind of let go of thinking. And when I'm diving, I feel like I can let go, and like the sea is around me and the water's got me, and I might feel uncomfortable about it before I go in, but when I'm in it, there's nothing I can do about it. And it, when we're talking about things like death and not being able to sleep, I guess death is the ultimate letting go and lack of control. And I wondered if that was something to do with going on behind why you'd made that connection between death and sleeplessness.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. It's so true. I mean, there are all sorts of associations between death and sleep, and I hear sometimes people say that they can't sleep because they're afraid of the sort of annihilation of it, you know, the lack of consciousness, and in the way that we're afraid of the annihilation of death. And I don't really have that. In fact, it's the opposite for me. I crave it. You know, I really want that unconsciousness to come to me. I don't want to spend any more time awake thinking, you know. I yearn for sleep, but as soon as you try to control sleep in any way, it just falls through your fingers. You know, it's an unthinking act. The mind has no part to play in going to sleep. It's a physical, animal act, and as soon as your mind starts to get involved and try to work it out, it just all goes wrong. And I think that's where you're absolutely right. Swimming is so kind of consoling, because it's kind of like that. Your mind has no place when you're just swimming through water. I haven't ever dived, actually. I'd really like to try, but I imagine that's just, you know, that steals all your other thoughts, doesn't it? You're so enveloped by the water and the sensory experience of it.
Yeah, I found that diving is, yeah, like sleep, where being brain kicks in and thinking brain just hasn't got any space. And I know, so Sarah, I listened to your podcast last weekend, Brain on Nature, where you are talking about how important it can be to kind of give your brain a break, and that nature can do that for you in a biological way. It kind of let the load dissipate. And yeah, so is that what you found? Because you had a trauma to get over as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I had a mild traumatic brain injury from falling off my bicycle a few years ago, and found that, yeah, just removing all the stimulus that's in our lives really helped me recover, reduce my headaches, and improve my focus and concentration. And so, yeah, I felt like when I was in the forest or when I was swimming in the ocean, even just sitting in my back garden, that it would alleviate a lot of the, would also work to alleviate anxiety and the depression that I had from the fact that I was off work for months and months with no sign of recovery. But I think just that, like you say, that the sort of stillness in nature and the quiet and the lack, that you're not being sort of having all this information thrown at you all the time that you're having to process, and especially in the modern world that we're in.
Absolutely.
And also, Georgie, you mentioned sort of that focus on death in Samantha's book, but there's also in your book as well. I mean, there's a bit of a fixation on death as well. And I just wondered, I mean, how does death relate to phobias? What's the connection there?
It took me a while to notice it, but I think that death is at the root of all of our fears is my working assumption as of this moment, because for me anyway, I found that I'm afraid of the unknown, and I really like to have control, which is an illusion because there's so much I can't control. Like even going on inside my own body, I've got no idea about those processes. They just do their thing. And yeah, so the idea of not knowing when death is going to come for me or the people that I love, that's my biggest fear, that sudden loss of those people and those things. And how that relates to fish is quite weird, I guess. How they So fish for me represented the ultimate unknown before I started thinking too much about death. In that we don't know what they're thinking most of the time, unless we're really switched on fish scientists, but even they often have no idea why a shark or something is behaving in the way it is, and they're trying to find out. And you have to surrender. They're completely in control of their environment. And when you get into their environment, you're at the mercy of whatever the sea decides to do or whatever the fish decides to do. And when you start thinking about the big fish, because I became fixated with the whale shark, which is the biggest fish in the world. And the image of the whale shark just felt so much like a kind of Grim Reaper type figure that would just kind of come out really slowly in the dark ocean and then turn, and it kind of doesn't look like it's looking at you, and then actually it fixes its eye on you and you think, right, this is it, I'm a goner, it's oblivion time. So that's how it related for me. And I became really obsessed with kind of Googling pictures of dead bodies and like diving accidents and things like that to try and confront that fear and see what happened. And I think you did some Googling as well, didn't you, Samantha? You were like trying to understand, is that right? Kind of early on in Shapeless Unease, I was like, Sam went to the internet too.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the problems of being awake too much at night as well, is that you turn to Google for, for things. Yeah, I mean, I spent too much time being overly interested, I think, in death. But actually, I think it was a very helpful thing for me, because I've always been vaguely afraid of death, you know, in a way that I guess most of us are. And you're absolutely right. I also think that death is at the root of all of our fears. It's where they all lead back to. And even if we're not consciously afraid of death, there's that sort of, absolutely, that's the ultimate kind of lack of control. We know it's the one certainty we have in our lives, actually, that we're going to die. There's nothing else is certain. But we don't know when and we don't know how. And so there's a lot of, obviously, a lot of fears attached to it. But having kind of faced it for the last couple of years in all sorts of forms, and faced an awful lot of fears, actually, from being awake at night and also from just writing about it all, I don't feel afraid of death anymore, actually. It's been quite a strange thing. And so I've only just realised that when I start thinking about it in this last week or two, actually, and with everything that's going on with the pandemic and so on, and realising, yeah, I don't actually fear it anymore. So I don't know if that's a lasting position or whether it's a fleeting reprieve, but anyhow, it's lovely.
Do you think that's because you have been facing it for so long, or
I think so.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, fear fuels the narratives of both of your books, and it's great that you're not fearing death so much now, Samantha. But could we discuss your relationship with anxiety, given BookBound's 2020 links to sort of mental health charity Mind?
Which of us would you like to?
Oh, sorry, I was meaning to you. I was talking to, sorry, I should have made that clear. I'll get Samantha first and then I'll go to Georgie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Anxiety, I think, is a much kind of overused word, or it's a word that's so generic as to not kind of mean anything anymore. And I have a section in my book where I am up at night and I start Googling what the difference is between fear and anxiety, because I have been told so many times that the reason I can't sleep is because I'm anxious, and I think, well, fine, but I've been anxious many times in my life, and I've just gone to sleep. It doesn't quite seem that that's what it is, and I started to kind of look up the difference between the two and try to understand them, and they do happen in different parts of the brain. And fear is the response to a real threat, whereas anxiety is the response to a perceived threat. So you can never really deal with anxiety, because it's not, the thing that you're anxious about is not really there. It's not happening. So it becomes this kind of self-iterating thing that you can't run from, you can't fight, and you can't freeze. And those are our well-known three ways of dealing with a fearful situation. So I think that's why it's such a kind of entrenched problem in so many of us, because you're fighting or trying to fight an invisible foe, and there can be no victory in that. So I can see those anxious patterns in my own mind at times, but I feel like what I've been dealing with sleep much more is actual fear, fear of sleep deprivation. It isn't an anxiety about an unknown threat. It's a very known, real threat, and something that in an extreme and severe case does threaten your life. So the relationship between the two has been really interesting to me, to try to look at what's happening in my own mind generally and think, is this fear, and is there something I can ever do about it? Or is it anxiety, and is it just feeding itself, and can I somehow disrupt that pattern? And I've found more and more that with the anxious patterns, I can disrupt them, and the fear is a more difficult thing in a way. I don't know how that was been for you, Georgie. I mean, I guess your phobia of fish feels like it's more fear-based, but I don't know how you would see it. Is it anxiety-based? Does it feel like it's something that's just feeding itself, or is it very much related to an object?
I think it's quite complex. I've grown to become quite an anxious person in general, and I think I've noticed that when I was a kid I didn't have that anxiety and I didn't have that phobia, and I was around fish and things like that. And so I think with other things that were going on in my life, and losing relatives, people who are close to me who died and things like that, it fueled the possibilities of how terrible things could be, and I attached it to fish. It gave me something to channel. That wasn't supposed to be a pun about the English Channel or anything, but I wish it had been. It gave me a focus for my anxiety, in that, okay, I'm an anxious person, but here's something that I can actually look at that is scaring me. And so let's just try and map what's happening there to the rest of my life. And I have tried to do that. And actually the things I've learned in trying to find the whale shark, and especially talking to other divers, I've been starting to use that in my life in general. So one thing that really surprised me, because I was so caught up in my own anxieties, is that when I was talking to all these fascinating divers and explorers and stuff, they were all anxious too. They were scared. They were doing their thing, and from the outside it looked like they were fearless, but actually they're not, and they had the same worries that I did. One of my interviewees is a guy called Ahmed Gabor, who he's an Egyptian diver, and he broke the world record for deepest dive that a human has ever done in scuba equipment. he went down to 332 meters to the twilight zone of the ocean on his own. And it took him 14 minutes to go down and something like 14 hours to come back to the top, because of all the dangers of the bends and all these crazy things that were going with his nervous, like his central nervous system. What am I trying to say? Central nervous system. That's the word. Thank you. Woo! I was getting so caught up in thinking about Ahmed stuck in the sea, and I was just asking him, like, well, you know, how did you do that? Because that would have killed, if 99.9 recurring % of people in the world had tried to do that, they would have died, no question. And he nearly did, and he was dehydrated for about 2 months after this one dive and had 2 years of nerve damage and things. And he was just like, well, you know, I just had to try it. And he was just in the moment. He just stayed in the moment the whole time. And that's what I really struggle to do, is stay in the moment. But like right now, we're having this conversation together. I'm in the moment. I feel okay. Before this conversation, I was getting anxious about the conversation. Oh my God, I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm going to be really stupid. Oh my goodness. After this conversation, I'll probably do that for about a day or two and worry about it. But right now, when we're kind of diving in this chat, it's okay. So yeah, I'm learning from fish and divers.
We sort of touched on this before, but I wondered if we could dive into it, no pun intended, a little bit more. In both books, nature becomes a bit of a point of focus during some of the disturbed periods of your lives, with Samantha wild swimming and Georgie learning to dive. What role do you both think that nature is playing there? Perhaps I'll go to Samantha first and then we'll come back to Georgie.
Well, as someone who feels often, I mean, most of the time actually, like we've been born in the wrong century, probably by a couple of centuries. I kind of feel a huge amount of abrasion from the modern world and from noise. You know, I think part of what fueled my insomnia was noise. I had a noise problem at the house I lived in before, and then we moved house, and then there was a bit of road noise, and it was nothing that would have bothered a normal human being. But I became quite neurotic about it, and I find a lot of things about the modern world, actual noise, but kind of metaphorical noise, just the noise of news and social media and all of it. I find it very abrasive and very distressing, and I have always been someone who's needed to get out for a walk, you know, every day, or a bike ride, or a run, or a swim, or something, just and to be in the world, you know. And I don't think there's anything particularly mysterious about it. I think we are, you know, we are part of the earth. We just are. We're physical, organic things, and we need that. And we need to know that we're a part of that. We need to feel that we belong to this earth. And I think we so often don't feel that. You know, we don't have that feeling of. I do this morning meditation, which is a lovely kind of online sitting that started since the beginning of lockdown. And one of the speakers the other day, it was Earth Day, and she was speaking about this kind of our relationship to the earth, and she brought up a childhood memory of being in Africa and lying in the branch of a beautiful old tree as a child, with her favourite sweets, and she was just lying in the branch of this tree eating sweets. And she said she has this feeling of that life wanted her and she wanted life. And I thought, wow, you know, actually that's something I think a lot of us don't feel. I certainly don't have, you know, I kind of want life most of the time. I don't really necessarily feel that it wants me. You know, there isn't that feeling of symbiosis, of really belonging to the earth and the earth belonging to me. And I know it all begins to sound a little bit kind of vague, or tree huggy, but there's something, we do belong to this earth. It is the only thing we have. And I think trying to, for me, that prompted, her comment prompted this sort of invitation to me to think, okay, how do I want life? In what ways do I want it? In what ways can I feel that it wants me back for as long as I'm here? I think it's incredibly important, and a feeling of being grounded, really grounded on the earth, which is something that's very much missing for me when I can't sleep. I feel like I'm so ungrounded, and that I'm just kind of falling, and there's nothing there that's going to catch me, and it's a horrible feeling. You're sort of waiting for sleep to catch you, and it never does. And so that sense of being grounded, and that doesn't have to just come through nature. I mean, I find writing an incredibly grounding activity, and it gives me as much peace as going for a walk does. So it's not only through nature, but I think that's one very immediate, real way that we can feel that we belong to something.
It's interesting what you're saying about noise, Samantha. I found after I had my mild traumatic brain injury that I was so sensitive to noise. I was the same. I couldn't stand the sound of my kids. I couldn't go to a cafe or a bar or a restaurant, anything like that. Everything was really loud and all at the same volume. Like I couldn't sit in a room where there was more than one conversation going on. Everything had to be really just one sound at a time. I couldn't listen to music or anything, and particularly, and that took a really long time to sort of go away. And I'm still very I still really just always search out quieter spaces, like in the natural world, like you're saying, where there isn't. And then there's that double meaning of noise as well. And I also had that same experience, and often still, of just finding that the city in the modern life is just too much noise. There's too much you're having to digest all the time. And there's actually a lot of science behind that. When I was researching Brain on Nature, there's a lot of science saying exactly that our modern lives and these smartphones are just like, the opposite of nature, right? Nature's like the natural antidote to all the technology that we use. So you're certainly on the right track there. And how about yourself, Georgie?
Well, I was just thinking when I was listening to both of you that also the thing I really crave from nature is being put in my place and told that I'm not actually that important. And so, because our cities are just all about people are everything, money is everything, look at all the people, be a good person. And actually nature doesn't give a toss. You could just go out, you can be a body that is just walking or swimming and doesn't mean anything to anyone, which sometimes is scary because we want to feel like we're important sometimes, or I do sometimes, but actually I quite like being able to surrender to the idea that I'm a nothing. My experience is pointless really, but and then when you get to that point of feeling like, well, none of the anxieties really, like none of this matters really, then you can actually start enjoying life and enjoying nature, and then like just seeing what's around and observing. And I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of philosophers over the years that have drawn on that point exactly, that like going into the natural world gives us an awareness of how small we are, and therefore how small our worries are, and just giving us that context. And I completely, I've experienced that a lot as well, with spending time in nature and anxiety and things.
Yeah, it's hard to let go though, because I think because of how our society is built, the concept that you aren't important and that you don't matter at all goes against so much of what we hear. And so when I was thinking, I kept having this image in my head fixated on imagining myself a tiny person next to a huge whale shark. And oh my goodness, how am I going to cope? It would be like seeing infinity for the first time, like the guy in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy who goes insane. because infinity is just too terrifying. But actually, if you let it go, if you can let go, if I can let go, I find life is just, then you can kind of coast through it rather than grabbing onto everything. I was really interested in what you said just now, Samantha, about how writing gives you a similar feeling to being out in nature. And what I was really interested in is that there's, for me anyway, there seems to have been quite a big difference between writing and publishing, and having this. So I was looking, so I've got both my books here, little shot here. On the back of your book, it's been branded non-fiction, which it is. The back of my book's been branded memoir. Like, when I say branded, it's tiny letters next to a barcode. And the idea that I've written a memoir and that it's kind of me out in the world with this writing that I was doing, and I enjoyed the writing, I loved it. But then it being out to everybody and being judged, how do you relate to that, Samantha? What does it feel like for you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. It's such a big question for all published writers, I think, and unpublished writers when they're thinking about what it would be like to be published and aspiring to that. And and before I was published, I felt that if I ever got published, it would be the best and the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I was right. I think that writing itself is this immensely fulfilling, sometimes frustrating, challenging, but always ultimately grounding and fulfilling and kind of beautiful thing for me to do. There's nothing I would rather do with my life than this. And I'm a novelist, really. I mean, this is the only non-fiction book I've written, and it may well be the only non-fiction book I ever write. So I'm used to writing novels, and that's a slightly different thing, because you're not sort of on the pages in the same obvious way. With this book, I thought I would feel much more exposed when it was published, and I haven't actually. I felt it's sort of insulated me, the fact that I wrote this book. I never intended to write a book about not sleeping. It was, if someone had proposed that to me, I couldn't have done it. I didn't have the capacity to write a book length thing. I was so sleep deprived, and I didn't want to write about myself. But it just came out, and it was a sort of act of survival to write it. So because it fulfilled its purpose in the writing of it as a sort of a lifeline, I care less now about what happens to it in the world. I think there are, there are different elements to being published, and one is the industry itself. And even if you have a publisher that you feel very supported by, which I do, it's an unpleasant industry. It's just nothing really very nice about it. You're pitched in competition with your peers and the people that you meet and that you like and you respect, and it's this horrible kind of sort of covert competition between writers, and there's so many books out there, and you feel small. This whole thing about not mattering, feeling small, being invisible, all of that comes into it. But then the other side of it, which isn't the industry but the readers themselves, and just getting a reader and then writing you an email and saying, this book it's the best thing I've read for ages, and it helped me understand something about my life, or it really made me want to write, or whatever it is. That one connection is enough to justify the whole thing to me. I mean, the writing of it is enough to justify it, but to justify being published, for all of the industry is somewhat, I think, kind of depressing and degrading in a lot of ways. Those real connections between the author and the reader are life-giving, aren't they? They're sustaining, and I never get fed up with that. In fact, I value that more and more as I as I go through my writing career. How about you, Georgie? Oh, sorry, Sarah.
I know.
I found it, because this is my first book, and I also didn't set out to write anything that would be called a memoir. I have always thought of this book as an adventure story, and in the first drafts, the earliest drafts, I was really going for it, like adventure, and little bits of my personal life were kind of, I was touching on them here and there because I kind of had to, just to explain why I was going to certain places. And the editorial team at Fleet, who they're lovely, they said, Georgie, I think you might need to expand on this. And because obviously I'd been writing something that was a bit like dangling, hello, here's something interesting, but I'm not going to tell you about it. And so I was kind of coaxed towards writing more about me, and I still feel quite strange about it, because for me the really exciting things in the book are all the stuff I hear from other people, and not the stuff I have to say. But then readers have contacted me, and that's been amazing, and to say I really was interested in your story and the anxiety, and I needed to read this right now, which was an amazing feeling. So I felt quite exposed, but also invisible, because it's a first book and there are so many fantastic books out there. It's really hard to kind of justify why it can feel sometimes, especially if you've got some low self-esteem from time to time, it can feel really hard to justify why people should be reading your book over anyone else's. I do think it's a good book. I think people should read it, but do I? Yes, no, I do. I don't know. So that's a very waffly, backwards and forwards answer.
I was just going to say, I wondered whether you both found the process of writing it and then publishing it and sharing the stories, if it helped you further sort of process your experiences. Like I found when the writing and producing and then finally sharing of Brain on Nature, which was a very slow burn project, I did it over years, but I felt that it actually helped me process the experience a bit. And I just wondered if that was the same for you. Samantha, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. And I think this book that's 100% what it is. It's me processing something. And I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. I just wrote because I couldn't write a novel. I didn't have the bandwidth for it. I was severely sleep deprived for a long time, and I couldn't do very much. And I thought, well, what do I know how to do? I know how to write, so I'll just write some sentences. And then I wrote some more sentences, and I found that the things that came out were surprising me. It wasn't planned. I'm not a meticulous planner anyway when I write my novels, but I know I'm writing a novel, and I have a vision for it that's quite clear to me, and it usually has a sound or a sense of music about it, or there's something, there that I can get a hold of. But with this, I didn't even know that I was writing a book. I had no idea what it was. It was just some words on the page because I couldn't do anything else. And I had no plan for it, no design. And it came out in all these different voices and registers and tones. And there's a short story in there, which is kind of random. And I'm not really a short story writer, but this, I just in 2 days just kind of wrote this short story that began to work its way in, and then elements of the story started to bleed into the rest of what I was writing. And then I found that there really wasn't that much that was different about non-fiction and fiction. They feed off the same preoccupations. And I found the whole thing was me just very subconsciously processing what was happening to me. And actually, because I wasn't sleeping really much at all, and that meant that I wasn't dreaming much at all. And I think that this book, it occurred to me long after I wrote it, was my kind of replacement for dreaming, because I think that writing is, and I talk about this a bit in the book, is a form of It's very much like dreaming. It's like a form of lucid dreaming. It's very much the stuff of the subconscious which is coming up, and you're giving it form and body and putting it into scenes, but it's all just subconscious stuff. And when you're not sleeping, you're not processing all of that subconscious stuff. So writing was doing that for me. It was almost like a dream replacement. And so in a very real way, I think it was keeping me sane. And which is why I kind of, much as I love to get positive feedback on it, if I have a bad review, I think, like, it doesn't matter to me what someone, you know, in the Sunday Times thinks of it. It just simply doesn't matter, because it's come from a place in me which is so true and so honest, and that I needed to write so badly. You know, my life depended on me writing it. That's how it felt at the time. But it's really academic to me whether somebody else has a problem with it in some way. So yeah,
that's great.
Yes, that's a lovely feeling.
Yeah, that's really good. I felt putting myself out there was also like, as a journalist, I'd never done anything personal, and also actually started off thinking that Brain on Nature would be not so personal, but you know, naturally it needed to be, and it was a huge thing for me to put that out in the world. But Georgie, I just wanted to ask you quickly, did it help you process your experience by actually writing it and publishing it?
Yeah, definitely. When you're sat down and forced to explain why you're making certain decisions to a reader, you suddenly realize why, well, before then I hadn't realized why I had this drive and why I really wanted to go out and learn to dive and do all this. So that was really interesting. I surprised myself. And then the other thing that was great about the research, especially for this book, was that it brought me in contact with some really brilliant people in diving and in marine biology and all around the world. And it gave me a sense of feeling very connected to a really interesting bunch of people, and being around those people and hearing their stories, I don't know, I felt less alone, and I felt like this was a really great project to be doing because it had brought so many interesting strands together. And I'm very happy that I've been able to share so many people's stories in the book, and also happy that I've learned through this quest how important it is to me, to be in nature, but also to have great people around me and a good support network and people I can talk to and ask questions of. And so that's been yeah, I'm so glad I did it.
Which is probably a good note to finish on, because I'm just looking at the time and we are sort of going over. But look, thank you both very much for joining me tonight. And I've just wanted to remind everyone that there's lots of great events on our program. You can search for BookBound 2020 on Twitter and Instagram to learn more, and please help us spread the word of hashtag BookBound 2020. And if you'd like to buy Samantha Harvey or Georgie Codd's books, there's the links in the text below this video. Will take you through to Hive, which is an online bookseller that supports independent bookshops, which is also one of the things that we're doing with this festival. And there's also links to the books discussed here, and a discount code as well on some of the selected festival titles. And you'll also find our authors' favourite independent bookshops that we're shouting out across the globe. And there's, importantly, the Just Giving link to donate to our chosen charity, which is Mind, supporting mental health. Thank you very much, and hope to see you at some of our other events soon. Bye for now.